The commission is seated. There you are. So we will resume these hearings, and I welcome you, Michael Sfard, to these hearings.
Thank you.
You would know that this is the Commission of Inquiry set up by the United Nations Human Rights Council to investigate not only in Palestine, but in Israel and East Jerusalem, violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law, and to identify the root causes of the conflict. Now, in this session of the public hearings, we are listening to civil society organizations, and we felt that it is very important that we hear from you, since you represent some of these organizations. So in your testimony, Mr. Sfard, the Commission would like to hear from you on issues faced by lawyers representing the NGOs in their efforts to challenge the designations of terrorism and unlawfulness against them. And secondly, how you see the treatment of civil society organizations in the OPT and Israel. And of course, before beginning your testimony, please provide us with information on your name, who you are, and your kind of work, and how whether you have experienced obstacles or discoveries in your work in representing civil society organizations. And you can also place on record why you accepted to testify before the Commission. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. You can hear me, right? I'm just making sure.
Yes, we can, Michael.
Thank you. So my name in Hebrew is Michael Sfard, but I do respond when I'm called Michael. I'm an Israeli human rights lawyer. For the last 2.5 decades, I've been litigating almost exclusively cases that involve different challenges to different practices and policies of the Israeli authorities in the occupied Palestinian territories, but also in Israel regarding the Arab minority and other minorities within the 1949 ceasefire alliance borders. I represent the Palestinian human rights organization Al-Haq in its challenge of its designation as a terrorist organization and an unlawful association in Israel and the OPT. And I am the legal advisor to numerous Israeli human rights organizations and peace groups, to Palestinian communities, and to Israeli and Palestinian activists. And I've been doing that for, as I said, almost 2.5 decades now. I'm here for multiple reasons. I accepted the very generous invitation of the Commission for multiple reasons. First of all, I am, as I said, the acting lawyer for Al-Haq in the matter of the designation, and as such, I'm here to represent the cause of making this wrong end. But also in my personal capacity as a human rights lawyer, as a legal activist, I am committed to the international system for protection of human rights. And I believe that human rights activists and legal activists, first and foremost, always must cooperate with the international commissions and commissions of inquiry and different organs that are set up by the international community to protect human rights. Thirdly, and it is important for me to say, I'm also here because I'm a very concerned Israeli. I'm an Israeli. I was born in Israel. I was raised in Israel. I'm also a product of the state of Israel. And I feel deeply about my country and my society, and I'm very concerned about it. And I think that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not an internal Israeli affair. It is tantamount and crucial that the international community will be involved in solving this conflict. And so I'm also doing that because I'm also giving this testimony because I believe this is what is the right thing and the good thing to do to advance peace and stability and respect for human rights in my country and my society. I would like to start with your permission, Commissioner, dear commissioners, with a context. When we deal with the question of the space for political activism, for human rights defense in Israel or in the OPT, we must understand the context. And there are two layers to the context. The first is, and this is something that has to be acknowledged, that the occupation and the colonization of the Palestinian territories is Israel's biggest, most extensive national project for years now, for decades, for generations. Jewish supremacy in the entire land between the Jordan River and the sea is, even if not officially said so, and in some places it is said so, is the national objective. And Israel is, the state of Israel and the Israeli society are deeply vested in this project. So this is the first layer of the context in which we can understand better the treatment of the Israeli authorities of human rights groups and activists. The second layer is that we need to acknowledge that in the last 5.5 decades, I mean the last 7 decades, but let's focus on the issue of the occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the other territories, the Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, etc. The international, the political, the diplomatic, and the business sectors have all failed in bringing some kind of resolution to this conflict. In fact, diplomacy, the internal Israeli political process, economic considerations have all been major players in allowing and perpetuating the situation that we are at the moment. Israel's might, Israel's supremacy in military power, in economic power, and in political, geopolitical power makes it almost futile to go to these arenas and try to solve the conflict through these arenas. But there is one sector that for all that time has been very effective in leaving the issue alive and harassing these sectors, these classes, to do something about the conflict. And this is civil society in Palestine and civil society in Israel. And in both, civil society is very well equipped, very professional, and extremely connected, both in Palestine and in Israel. We have vibrant human rights communities, organizations, activists, academics, and the work that is done by both Israeli and Palestinian, and also international, but I'll focus now on the local organizations, is the main vehicle that furnishes the discussion over Israel-Palestine globally. When B'Tselem or Al-Haq, for that matter, issue a new report, it sets down the tone. It provides the valuable factual basis for any discussion that will be held in political, in diplomatic, or in media circles. Now, I heard, Madam Chairwoman, the question you asked from the HWC the executive director before. What happened in 2015? Well, in 2015, the most radical national government Israel has ever had. This record might be broken in coming days, but up till now, was sworn into office. And for the first time, we had a government that almost openly advocated a policy of gradual annexation of the occupied Palestinian territories. This has begun in 2015, but accelerated radically in 2017 after the change of administrations in Washington when then President Donald Trump came into office, and the Israeli government felt that it has much less to lose by openly advancing annexation policy. And yet again, the civil society, both in Israel and Palestine, were there to provide the information, the very important information that that had an effect in the international arena and also within Israel and Palestine. So these are the contexts, and this context is very important. The only class of professionals that, or not even professionals, the only class of players in, if we can use that term, that are involved in trying to make a change in reality in the conflict is civil society, and that slice of civil society that is dedicated to bringing an end to both occupation, colonization, and Jewish supremacy. And this is why the civil society organizations, both in Palestine and in Israel, have been targeted. Now, I can only, I'm testifying here as a witness, and I can testify from my own private, personal experience, that until a decade ago, my positions about the wrongs that the Israeli policies are inflicting on Palestinians have not been different. Yet, when I spoke to commissions, to journalists, to diplomats from all around the world, there was always this moment that I was always very happy when I could say, but with all my criticism, one thing is clear, and it's a good thing that I can say about my country: I can speak freely, and I can operate freely, and human rights defenders in Israel are safe. Well, that's no longer the situation. Of course, in Palestine, they were never safe. In Palestine, they were never able to speak freely. But with the growing process of annexation, also these kind of policies of targeting activists and human rights organizations and defenders are seeping into Israel from the West Bank. So in a way, the West Bank, with its occupation mentality, is annexing Israel rather than the other way around. So this is the context. And so since 2015, we're seeing an array of tools that is being used by the Israeli government to target civil society, to restrict their work. And I'll just give, I'll provide you with some headlines to the type of tools. Criminalizing speech, criminalizing certain types of actions, which are actions that are taken by regular actions done by activists. Incitement, severe incitement against organizations, and of course, designating an organization as a terrorist organization, which I'll get to in a moment, or inside Israel, legislating that Israeli organizations who enjoy the donations of foreign governments must prescribe in every, must present themselves as agents of foreign governments, which is complete nonsense. We operate independently. We decide what to do. We don't get orders from anyone. And we're very happy and very proud that democratic governments trust us and provides donations. There are multiple of GONGs, of governmental, non-governmental organizations. These are organizations that are as if CSOs, but in fact are satellite organizations of the government that keep on harassing activists. They incite against them. They launch legal actions against them. We have a huge surge in the number of defamation lawsuits against activists. Now, if you examine the portfolio of my office 10 years ago and today, you'll see that 10 years ago, 100% of my work was defending the victims of Israeli governmental actions in the occupied Palestinian territories, mainly Palestinians. Now, a large percentage of what I do is to defend the defenders, to protect the space for them to operate. Restricting funding is another huge issue, and I'm afraid that we might see it come up in coming months when the new government in Israel will be formed. All kinds of ideas of imposing taxes on funding of human rights organizations. And of course, the most grievous act is outlawing organizations. And here I come to the designation of the 6 Palestinian human rights organizations. Look, for me, it's quite clear we're now more than a year, almost 13 months or 12 and a half months after the designation, which took place at the end of October of 2021. And for me, it was quite immediately clear what was the target, why these organizations were targeted, and why the action that was taken against them was so dramatic. Because as Executive Director of Al-Haq said yesterday, Sharon Jabarin said yesterday in his testimony, designating an organization as a terrorist organization is the equivalent to the capital punishment. It's a death penalty. You're not allowed to exist. And there's a multiple of criminal and administrative powers that are vested with the government and the army to compel this organization from to stop operating and to create a ring of around it so that third parties would not interact with it. So for me, it was clear already back then what was the reason. And with time, throughout these last 13 months, it became crystal clear. I think I got more and more proofs to what was back then a speculation, a learned speculation, but now it's quite clear. And I'll go immediately to the bottom line. If you examine the timeline of the targeting of these 6 organizations, which did not begin with designating them as a terrorist organization, began long before in 2017, 2018, with not in the Ministry of Defense, but rather in the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, not with the charge of being terrorists, but with the charge of delegitimizing Israel, promoting BDS, and of course, promoting accountability to Israeli soldiers, officers, and leaders within the ICC, and not only within the ICC. When you look at the timeline, together with the timeline of the advancement of the ICC, the prosecution team work on Israel-Palestine, and you see when was the decision made by the court that it has jurisdiction over Israel-Palestine. And you see when the different donor countries, mainly Western European governments, have completely dismissed the Israeli demand that they stop supporting these organizations. When you see when all that happened and waiting for the new prosecutor to take office, hoping in Jerusalem that he will put the Israel-Palestine file on the back burner, maybe freeze it for this reason or for the other. And then we have, in the summer of 2021, the prosecutor has made his statement on the priorities on his docket that he inherited from his predecessor. And he did freeze some cases, mainly the American Afghanistan cases, but not the Israel-Palestine. And that was the last straw that made the government of Israel decide, or the Minister of Defense, that in order to frustrate the investigation, they need to put a big barrier between the prosecution team and the main organizations that provide assistance to that team locally. And everyone who knows anything about how these investigations go understand that without local partners who can provide the roadmap and the access to communities, to witnesses, to victims, and to documents, without this, the prosecution team is it is very difficult to advance in the investigation. And it is known, and it's not a secret, that some of the 6 organizations have been advancing the investigation in The Hague. And the Minister of Defense himself, Minister Gantz, presumably is one of the people who the complaints that were lodged with the prosecutor were against. So he has a personal interest vested in frustrating the investigation. Not only that, the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister of the State of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has openly said in the ceremonial first convening of his last government, which was the unity government with Gantz, that The Hague is, quote unquote, a strategic threat to Israeli interests. And he even used the words, he said, and I quote, "Those who know me know that I do not use the word strategic lightly." So if The Hague is a strategic threat, then frustrating the investigation is a strategic goal. And by designating these organizations, this is one of the acts taken by the government of Israel to create huge obstacles before the investigation, hoping that the donors will stop supporting, the organizations will cease existing, and these very crucial partners in the process of investigation will evaporate. Now, I began litigating on behalf of Al-Haq very closely to when the designation took place. And now I have been for 13 months the acting lawyer in this case. And I want to share with you the fact that we have received absolutely nothing that we can reply to. So I'll start by saying that, as you know, and from the previous testimony, it was this issue was raised. 2 employees that were fired by the HWC have been interrogated by the Israeli security services, and they presumably implicated the HWC for different for diverting funds allegedly to the PFLP. These 2, if that is true, they were the ones who did it, and if it's true, they were the ones who stole money from the HWC. Nevertheless, the only thing that we did receive from the authorities is their interrogations. They have absolutely no personal knowledge of any other organization but the HWC. And yet it is clear that the investigators are after trying to make them implicate and incriminate other organizations, although they have no personal knowledge about them. They never worked there. They don't have any internal information. When it comes to Al-Haq, there is absolutely no implication. No implication. The only sentence that was said by one of these 2 former employees of the HWC is when asked which organizations in Ramallah are known to be PFLP, and they list a number of organizations, and then they are asked by the investigator, and what about Al-Haq? And one of them allegedly says Al-Haq too. And even the most basic thing that every first law school student would know, that the follow-up question would be, how do you know, is not asked. Even that basic question, how do you know, that you say yes? Nothing. So this is the only thing that we have that was given to us. The army, I have to say, acknowledged, and in the letter accompanying the investigation material that they have forwarded to us, in the accompanying letter, they said, your attention is that the incriminating evidence is not in this pile of documents. It's in a secret dossier, which we are not willing to disclose. So we are faced with the following situation. Not only that we are not privy to the evidence that allegedly incriminate us, it's much worse than that. We have asked to know the details of the allegation. Okay, we understand. There is an allegation that we are an arm of the PFLP. That we understand. But what makes us an arm of the PFLP? What did we do? When did we do it? How did we do it? Who did it? I said in the advisory committee to the Minister of Defense that is presiding over the hearings in our challenge, I said that it is very similar to an indictment that will be lodged against an individual. And the indictment would say, you are indicted, you are responsible for a murder. But it would not say who the defendant has murdered, when, where, and how. Nothing of that sort. All we know is this very general accusation that Al-Haq is an arm of the PFLP. Even I heard that you asked Executive Director Shawan Jabarin about diversion of funds. So I have to say that the Minister of Defense is very much foggy with this accusation regarding Al-Haq. It is not written. It is not written. This accusation was leveled against some of the organization. It was not leveled against others. When it comes to Al-Haq, it says something very, very foggy, that Al-Haq resources advance the goals of the PFLP or something of that sort. But let's assume that the accusation is diversion of funds. How much? When? What? For us, we cannot challenge what is not leveled against us. It's like a fist fight with the wind. There's nothing to grab. And we have been fighting for 13 months on getting the information on both levels. What are the exact charges? What are the exact allegations? Not just the headline. What are the allegations? What did we do? And second, what are the evidence that support these allegations? Now, a secret dossier is not something that is unheard of. I mean, there are many systems where there is a precedence to information that disclosure of might damage national security or national interests. But in all systems, due process, basic tenets of due process demand that such secret evidence, if left undisclosed, will be replaced by an alternative that allows effective defense. It could be a redacted copy of the evidence. It could be summations, a gist that is a summation of the evidence. We received absolutely nothing. Nothing. Only this, the minutes of the investigation of the HWC file, which has absolutely nothing to do with us, with Al-Haq definitely, but other organizations too. Now, since the designation took place, many governments around the world raised their brows and asked, we know Al-Haq, we know DCI Palestine, we know Adamir, we know the rest. In every, even democratic system, targeting a human rights organization is something that is unusual and must be substantiated very well, because usually human rights organizations, just like journalists, criticize centers of power. And there is a built-in interest in every center of power to silence criticizers. When it comes to a non-democratic occupation regime, there the chance that such draconian power was abused is much higher, of course. And so many governments asked the government of Israel to explain, to justify it. And the government of Israel began on a roadshow of providing what they call agency-to-agency disclosure of evidence with the British and with the Americans and with the French and, you know, all of the, and of course, Germans and the Scandinavians and different governments that were, the Dutch, I don't want to eventually forget someone, they all wanted to understand. Because if indeed these organizations advance the interests and support a designated terrorist organization, they don't want to do anything with it, of course. In July, the 9 donor countries, all of them from Western Europe, have issued a joint statement saying we have received, I'm of course not quoting, I'm paraphrasing, we have received a lot of documents from the government of Israel in patches, and we have seen nothing that substantiates the allegations. Hence, we will continue to support these organizations. Now, this is a huge thing. Not only them, but also a leak from the CIA said we've also didn't find any evidence that substantiates the allegations. So we're at a moment where these organizations are under life-threatening reality in which every employee in these organizations, and of course the directors and even volunteers, activists, could be at any moment arrested and prosecuted for very grave crimes, terrorist crimes that carry a double-digit number of years imprisonment. Shawan Jabarin, who you met yesterday, presumably is the head of a terrorist organization. And he could face, according to the Israeli Counterterrorism Act, up to 25 years imprisonment. The question of whether donations could flow to their Ramallah bank account is a standing question, because at any moment the government of Israel can block these transactions and confiscate the funds. And of course, they can be raided at any moment, their property can be confiscated, etc., etc. Now, this is the main issue. I would like, however, to address the issue of my work and the work of the lawyers, because there was, after the statement made by the 9 governments, which was a huge blow to the strategy of economically suffocating these organizations. That's how I think the strategy went. The idea was we will designate them, and donors, just like the interim executive director of HWC said before me, he said, it is easier to donate to someone else. This is what the government of Israel, I think, was hoping, that donors will stay away from these organizations. And gradually these organizations will be economically suffocating. But this statement was a big blow to that strategy. So several things happened following that statement. We were scheduled to appear before the minister. When I say me, it's myself on behalf of Al-Haq, another lawyer, Jawad Bulus on behalf of DCI Palestine, and the third lawyer, Avigdor Feldman, on behalf of the agricultural committees, but he was not scheduled with us. We were scheduled to appear before the advisory committee for the hearing, for the preliminary hearing in our challenge against the designation on July 20th this year. On July 14th, 6 days before the hearing, I get a letter from the MOD legal advisor And this letter says that I should take attention of Section 32D1 of the Counterterrorism Act of 2016, which provides that any transaction in terrorist property is a criminal offense that carries up to 7 years imprisonment. And since I'm representing a designated terrorist organization, and presumably I receive fees for my work, this is a transaction in terrorist property. And if I want in order for that not to be criminal, I need to apply for a permit for this transaction. The permit, by the way, is provided by the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Interior, together the Minister of Finance, Interior, and the Minister of Defense. So I have to ask for a permit from my rivals in this case to keep on representing. Now I have to say, before we continue, one more thing. It's not about fees, because later on I had a discussion with the legal advisor of the MOD, and I plainly asked, if I volunteer, if I do my work pro bono, will that not be a transaction in terrorist organizations' property? He said, of course it is, because then you are like donating your work to the terrorist organization. So it's not about receiving fees. It's about having a veto power over representation. That was issued 6 days before the hearing. Now, important fact is that I have been representing designated organizations from 2012, so about a decade. I had different clients who were designated organizations, some of them not local, from Europe, and I have been representing them before the Israeli authorities. Whenever I took upon myself to represent a designated organization, I sent a letter to the legal advisor of the MOD announcing, giving notice that I have been instructed by this or that organization. And if there's any issue, please write to me back. And I've never heard anything back. Suddenly, with Al-Haq, they broke the silence. Suddenly, they got reminded after 10 years and 6 days before my hearing that actually it's a grave criminal security terrorist offense if I don't have a permit from them. Of course, my reaction was that this is completely unacceptable. I think I've supplied the commission with copies of the letter I received, the translation of the letter I received, the letter I sent back. For me, it's a non-starter. Unless I'm instructed differently by my clients, my position as a lawyer, as a human rights lawyer, that this is, of course, a wrong reading of the Israeli law. The Israeli law never intended to restrict the freedom of representation by lawyers, and it never intended to restrict lawyers from acting on behalf of designated organizations in their challenge against the designation. It's not in any other issue. The only thing that a designated organization is allowed to do is to challenge the designation. That's the only thing they're allowed to do. And for that, they need a lawyer. So I had an exchange with the Ministry of Defense in which I said that I will not continue to litigate under the threat of imprisonment, and I will not ask for a permit. And eventually, I have also written on behalf of all the 3 lawyers that litigate cases on behalf of the designated organization to the Israeli Attorney General, asking her to intervene and to revoke that demand. We have not yet heard anything back from the Attorney General. I know that they are treating it seriously, that the Deputy Attorney General was appointed to deal with my letter. And for the time being, I asked the committee not to schedule any hearings until we hear from the Attorney General whether she agrees with the legal advisor of the Ministry of Defense. And then we will have, if that is the case, we will have to evaluate what we'll do. Now, I think that this was an attempt to send a message. And the message was, we will not, after the donating governments have dismissed completely the Israeli position regarding the designated organizations, it was a crossroad in which the government of Israel had to decide whether it will back off, revoke the designations, allow these organizations to keep operating, or it will enhance its pressure on the organizations. What the decision was probably to enhance the pressure, and that was done both by intimidating the lawyers and through the raid on the offices of all of these organizations that was also in proximity to these developments. Now, for me, this is a good example of how the government of Israel is unfortunately trying to silence these important voices. And Al-Haq is one of the beacons, the stars that provides the international community with credible and accurate information about the conflict, about human rights abuse, about international crimes, and about the nature and the changing nature of the Israeli control over Palestinians everywhere. And so for me, unfortunately, it's quite clear that the Israeli society does not have the internal strength to make things right. And we need good friends that will show us the way to do the right thing. I hope that the European governments, the American administration, the international community, who is very much responsible for this conflict, responsible not in the sense of fault, but in the sense that this is an international conflict and the international community has to be involved in solving it. And of course, the international institutions, and the Commission is a very respected and important part of the system that has to put the right pressure on the government of Israel to stop its onslaught on human rights groups in Palestine and also in Israel in different way, much more lenient at the moment, but also in Israel. I can speak much longer, but I'll stop here and allow you to comment and ask questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony and the context. I am considering that this obstruction to you providing legal defense for your clients who are subject to these designations doesn't only affect you as a lawyer, it affects the legal profession, does it not? It obstructs any kind of legal representation. So if you would like to comment on that, you know that this commission is looking at possible violations of international law. But my other question is, does the institution of lawyers, the Law Society or Bar Council, taken up this issue because it affects the profession? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. From the moment I received the letter from the Minister of Defense, the first letter that I sent as a response, I copied the Israeli Bar Association. And then I knocked on the doors of the Israeli Bar Association throughout the months that passed since then. I spoke to the head of the Israeli Bar Association and asked him personally to intervene in the matter. I have been in communications with the headquarters of the Bar Association I received unofficial sympathy and also a promise that they are looking into the matter seriously and that they will form an opinion and then make it public. Unfortunately, until this moment, 3.5 months after I received the first letter, they have not done so. Last week, I have written another letter to the Bar Association saying, look, this is really not a reasonable length of time to crystallize, to form an opinion on a eventually very simple or very focused legal question. If one of my junior lawyers would tell me after 3.5 months that they have not yet succeeded in forming a position on a legal question, it would not be good. And that I feel that they are trying to avoid getting into a clash with the Ministry of Defense. I received only an email saying we are still looking at the matter. The Bar Association has all kinds of internal bodies that have to address it. But the money time is now. The money time is now. Any day, the Attorney General might present its opinion. If the Bar Association does not go out and clearly and vocally say this is unacceptable, then it's as if they are supporting this. They are allowing it. They are enabling it. And this is very shameful. It is very shameful because, as you rightly said, Madam Chairwoman, this is something that gnaws on the legal profession and its safety as a whole. You know, let's leave me aside. I'm not that young. I have people definitely in the legal profession know me. But what about a young Palestinian lawyer? If a young Palestinian lawyer is arrested and dragged to the interrogation rooms of the Shabak, no one will know about it. No one will write it in the newspapers. So if they are so blunt as to issue these intimidations against very senior lawyers. Avigdor Feldman is maybe the most renowned lawyer, a human rights lawyer in Israel, my mentor. Jawad Bulus, who is also a veteran senior lawyer, and myself. If they are allowing themselves to do it here, what about the young lawyers, those who have no connections, not are known, etc.? So this is the kind of case in which if you are not if you're not voicing your opinion now, when they will come to take you, no one will be there to defend you.
Thank you, Mr. Sfard. I'll hand over to two commissioners in the room.
Mikhail, thanks very much for your very detailed testimony. The question I had was, you are attributing, this designation and the increased repression on the Palestinian civil society organizations from the time that they started to work and provide evidence to the ICC. But in the testimonies that we have heard over the last few days, it seems that arrests, raids, killings have been going on since early 2000, from at least before 2012. So there's definitely a pattern here, and I was wondering if you could, and in a way this is like a natural but very unfortunate evolution of that pattern of repression. So I was wondering if you could make that link and explain to us, what has been going on from, as you were also saying, from the beginning of the occupation. Thanks.
So if I was understood to say that it began in 2015, I beg your forgiveness. This is not what I meant. Repression began in 1967, on the first day that Israeli forces went into the West Bank. Al-Haq was under attacks since the day it was formed. But the type of targeting and the boldness has evolved throughout the years. Things that 15 years ago we thought are unheard of, would never happen, do happen now. And that has to do with the Israeli society going more and more to the right, the Israeli government's becoming more and more bold about violating basic rules of due process and fair procedures and things like that. Of course, the Palestinian society was targeted, and repression was always something that they were the victims of. But I think that there is a qualitative change when the government of Israel began advancing towards a de jure annexation, because the de jure annexation needed to it's a policy that is very risky in the sense of how the world would react to it. And so with it, and with the emergence of international civil society objecting to the Israeli occupation, that is something that, of course, there were always people in the international community that opposed Israel's occupation and Israeli policies, but the growth in the numbers and in the places where people see the Palestinian plight as a cause, in a way, a bit similar to the movement, the international civil society movement against apartheid in Southern Africa. That caused or created the need for new tools, new ways to target civil society. And so if once civil society, definitely within Israel, was exploited by the government, different governments of Israel, as a PR tool to say, look, we have democracy, we have freedom of speech, we have human rights organizations that operate freely. This is no longer the case. Our government does not want to use us as a fig leaf. No, they want us to basically to stop existing. So it's not that repression, and even very violent repression, was not there before. But the idea of actually shutting down human rights organization offices is a bit new. And it has to do with the new policy. It's not a new policy even, but it's openly, for the first time, I called it in an op-ed that I wrote, that the Israeli government came out of the closet. It always had policies that aimed at colonization, expansion of settlements, disinheritance of Palestinians of their property and lands, and eventually annexation. But only in the last several years, the idea of making it part and parcel of Israel became so transparent, so bluntly spoken of.
Yeah, I just had a related question. Thanks, Mikhail. When this designation happened with the organizations, and of course, as you were explaining, there are threats to you as well now. Were there signs of this? Could this have been predicted? And the related question is, if we see this trajectory of worsening repression, of more surveillance, where are we headed? What are you, as a lawyer, as a legal professional, as someone who has a legal office, your colleagues, human rights NGOs in Israel as well? What are you predicting?
There's a saying that in the Middle East, everything can happen, but apart from one thing, things cannot stay put. They either go to the bad direction or to the good direction, but they don't stay as they are. And this is what I am afraid. I I am truly afraid for Shawan Jabarin and for the other executive directors and the employees of the other organizations. I think that the security, the government is waiting for the right timing, and the right timing has to do only with the geopolitical considerations to arrest them. I don't see any other option than accelerating the pressure on these organizations, because, as I said, for the government, this is a strategic interest is on the line. And so if the governments that support these organizations continue to support them and provide their lifeline, then those issues that the government perceives as strategic threats will continue to be advanced by these organizations. You heard them. They're not deterred. They will continue to do what they do. So it's either backing off and saying this is a failed strategy because too much international price will have to be paid for continuing this, or the understanding would be that yes, we will suffer a few condemnations, maybe some nasty op-eds, but the main figures that allow these organizations to operate will be behind bars. I'm afraid that we have to take these threats seriously. By the way, these are actual threats. Shawan Jabarin got a phone call, as he told you, from a Shabak agent who later I have on writing a confirmation that he was indeed a representative of the Shabak, who told him plainly, if you will continue to open the office's doors and operate these organizations, we will have to detain you and to prosecute you. So we are, we're advancing towards a boiling point. And the political situation in Israel, I'm not a political analyst, but I don't think we need a political analyst to say that it doesn't seem that in the near future we'll have a government that will decide to back off, unless there is a credible threat of severe international reaction. That's the only way to stop it. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, but partly. And what about you and your lawyer colleagues and human rights organizations in Israel?
So this is an open session, and I don't want to give ideas to those who are after us. But first of all, I have to say there's nothing to compare the threats that are leveled against Israeli activists, Israeli lawyers, and Israeli organizations, and those who are leveled against our Palestinian friends and colleagues. They are under occupation. They have no civil rights. They have very little protection within the system. And for us, it's a different matter. And yet, it seems that the same strategy of silencing civil society in order to allow a smoother execution of the Israeli policies that are illegal under international law, that in some cases are even crimes under international law, is not only directed at Palestinian civil society, but also Israeli civil society. In the past, the government of Israel, headed by Benjamin Netanyahu, initiated bills which I'm afraid will now be revived, that might criminalize any assistance to, for example, the ICC, maybe even in any interaction with international tribunals and bodies who investigate and pursue accountability for Israeli officers and soldiers and leaders. There might be, and again, I'm not inventing things. These are things that have already been suggested and in the past were blocked, whether by pressure from the American administration, from the European Union, from Jewish communities around the world. But these are things that already were on the agenda, and I suspect they will come back. Also, the issue of restricting donations to human rights organizations is a very potential risk that we will be facing in coming months. When it comes to individuals, individual activists are already risking their health and their mental health and their physical health when they go to the ground. We have a huge surge in violent attacks by settlers on Israeli activists who escort Palestinian farmers, including savage, vicious attacks that ended up with severe injuries. And there are almost no cases in which the Israeli police apprehends the assailants and brings them to justice. Almost none. And we have almost every Saturday, almost every Sabbath, when settler youth and settler young people go out to attack Palestinian communities, and Israeli activists go to protect them and are on the line. Yesh Din is an organization an Israeli organization that I'm the legal advisor of and one of the founders of. We document these attacks, and our Facebook and Twitter account are filled with footage from such attacks. When it comes to lawyers, it's not just, I'm not brushing it off when I say that I'm not concerned about myself. It's not because I'm so brave. I truly think that the danger is that when they attack me, they cause self-censorship among younger, less known lawyers. I am not concerned that I will be arrested or anything like that. I don't think it will happen, but I think that the space for me to operate will constantly be narrowing down because legislation provides me with less and less tools to seek remedy. The Israeli judiciary is under a huge attack and is almost on the verge of going through a revolution that will completely strip it of its independence. So my work as a lawyer it has become in recent years very difficult, not because I'm attacked myself. It's also that, but that's not the issue. The main issue is that the tools, legal tools that I have to use in my work are getting smaller and smaller in numbers and weaker in the sense of how they are received in the courts that are themselves afraid of the implications of them providing remedy to Palestinians.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sfard, for the comments that you have provided and the answers to your questions. I want to focus in a bit more specifically on the current situation involving the appeals that have been taken in relation to the designations. You mentioned that no evidence has been given, but you also say that no allegations have been provided. What therefore are you arguing in the action that you're taking?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be very creative, right, as a lawyer. I've never been in a position where I had nothing to say. So that's for sure. I always have something to say. We concentrate on the lack of due process. That's what we do. I can't, for a very thin allegation, you are an arm of the PFLP, we can only reply with a very thin answer. No, we're not. We've never been an arm of any organization. We're an independent organization that receives commands from no one, provides funding to no one, diverts money to no one. We operate according to international human rights law and humanitarian law, and we have hundreds of thousands of beneficiaries. So that is our case. So what do? We argue that this process is faulty because it does not provide the very basic tenets of a due process. And we bring, I argued before the committee, I argued before the army, I brought international law, comparative law, Israeli administrative law, Israeli constitutional law to show that this is not a process that could fairly end in a designation. That's what we do. That's what is left. Now, we only had one hearing because later on, because of the threats against us lawyers, we halted the process.
All 6 of the designated organisations said to us that they were not notified of their designation, but they heard about it in the media.
Yeah.
The 7th organisation, it is not designated terrorist, but it's designated unlawful. And it said that it only found out 6 months later that it was declared unlawful, and that had not previously been advised. Now, it seems to me to be a due process issue to advise an individual or an entity of the making of a status declaration that has criminal and punitive consequences. I mean, is there a requirement in the law that these designations be notified to the parties that are designated and of the consequences of failure to notify?
More than that, the law provides that, as a general rule, an organization that is about to be designated and whose headquarters are located in an area that is under Israeli control should first be notified of the intent to designate, even before the designation takes place. And there is an exception in the Counterterrorism Act, which says that if such prior notification might cause harm to security, to state security, and things like that, then the Minister of Defense may sign the designation without prior notice. But then, of course, there is a requirement to notify the designated entity. This is, of course, one of the things that we've argued, that we've never been summoned, we've never been provided with a notification. However, I think under Israeli, I mean, at the end of the day, they have publicized the designation in the equivalent to the official journal or official paper. So that might, in retrospect, fulfill the requirement. Well, it was done in both in Hebrew and in Arabic. But that's not the issue. I mean, the main issue is that when we're dealing with an organization that no one argues that it's a shell. None of them, none of these 6 organizations. It's a shell that, in fact, it's not a human rights organization. It's not a research center. It's not a group that protects rights of minorities, juvenile justice. It's only a shell for terrorist activity. No one says that. Al-Haq was formed in 1979. Other organizations were formed in the early 80s. No one refutes or denies that they have dozens of thousands of direct beneficiaries and hundreds of thousands of indirect beneficiaries. When this is the case, and if you accept the idea that a human rights organization is an institution that provides a very needed service to the community, like a hospital, then you don't go and demolish it. You surgically remove whatever is wrong. If we know of a hospital, that the only hospital in town, that the director is involved in terrorist activity and the money person of that hospital was diverting funds to a terrorist organization, would we shut down the hospital and leave the community without medical services? Of course not. We would remove surgically those elements that we think did something wrong. So it's not only that the designation was not notified, but it is clear from the very drastic step that was taken that the idea was to just shut them up, not anything else.
You mentioned in your opening comments that the situations with the organisations got worse in 2017, that they were targeted before that, but 2017, which you associated with the initiation of an investigation by the International Criminal Court. What additional actions were taken in 2017 that had not been taken previously?
Well, it was the first time that the Israeli government openly went to donor governments and tried to persuade them to stop supporting these organizations. The Ministry of Strategic Affairs, now the late Ministry of Strategic Affairs, it was consolidated within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has issued official governmental reports alleging all kinds of allegations against these organizations in the methodology of guilt by association, which is the main way that NGO Monitor conducts its research. Okay, if you have been seen with someone, then you're responsible not only to what you've done, but also that someone who you've been seen with. So they have began creating a dossier alleging that these organizations are doing wrong things, delegitimizing the state of Israel and doing things and are connected. Already then we can see now in hindsight already allegations of interaction, contacts with known PFLP operatives and things like that, and a very strong governmental effort, advocacy in European capitals to stop supporting these organizations. And that has never been done, as far as I know, before 2017, 2018. It took time. In 2019, it's already a big issue. And all governments that are supporting these organizations have received Israeli officials asking them to stop the support.
Thank you. One of the responsibilities we've got under our terms of reference is to identify possible crimes under international law. And the situations that you describe could amount in domestic legal systems to obstruction of justice, trying to prevent the courts from exercising their functions by obstructing justice. And so there are serious questions about the links. And we're also supposed to be identifying potential individuals who may need to be further examined. Now, you said during your submissions that former General Benny Gantz was the defence minister who made the terrorist designations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. And you also referred to earlier actions taken by the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. In 2017, 18, 19, who was the Minister for Strategic Affairs?
It was Gilad Ardan, who is today the Israeli ambassador to the UN.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
I just have to say, I have not investigated any crime. I am raising suspicion that that obstruction of justice, and I think that under their own statute, obstruction of justice is also a crime, is also incriminated. I'm raising the suspicion, and I have very good circumstantial evidence that this is indeed the case. But of course, there is a need for a thorough investigation that will be done in due process, unlike the process that is given to my client.
Of course. goes without saying. I mean, due process is one phrase. The other phrase is natural justice.
Of course,
and this is
absolutely.
This is the fundamental issue, both in domestic and international law, if we are talking about the rule of law, of course.
And if the rule of law for us is something of an ideal that is not about domination only, but first and foremost about allowing people to, to flourish, and by being involved in an equal process of deciding what are the norms that govern our lives, something that the Palestinian people were denied for so many decades.
Thank you very much.
Sfard, I had one final question. Mr. Al-Husseini, the earlier person who gave us testimony, and you both mentioned the NGO monitor. Have you personally looked into this organization in terms of their functioning, in terms of their funding? They seem to be behind, a lot of what is going wrong. And you also mentioned their own role. Do you know anything more about them that could help us?
No, because this is an organization that flourishes thanks to principles of transparency and is not transparent in itself. I have not investigated NGO Monitor. They have been following me for years. Gerald Steinberg, Professor Gerald Steinberg, who is the man behind NGO Monitor. When I just opened the Twitter account, in a matter of 10 seconds, I got the message saying Gerald Steinberg is following you. So I replied to him. I thought you have been following me for years, and it was the first time that I blocked someone on Twitter. So, and the last. So I'm trying not to lose energy and time on NGO Monitor. They have been writing about me endlessly, and it's also always the same thing. It doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter what I do. It's who I see, who I represent, who I even talk to. Sometimes the audience implicates me because I was talking to a non-Zionist or whatever audience. This is a classic guilt by association technique, which was completely adopted by the government of Israel. And all the dossier about the six organization, I'm sure it's all like that. This guy was seen with that guy, and this one was formerly a prisoner, and all kinds of things like that. But, I didn't see the dossier, so these are just speculations.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sfard. You've been very generous with your time, and we appreciate the testimony you have given to the Commission. So once again, this Commission wishes to place on record that we are here to hear from everyone. We've called for submissions. We've called upon relevant states to provide us with documentation in relation to these designations. And we are still open to hear any voices that challenge the truth of the presentations we heard today. Thank you, everyone. With this, I will close these proceedings for today. The Commission will resume at 14 hours tomorrow with other witnesses. So thank you, Mr. Sfard, again.